It never occurred to me before, but as I have reminisced in these days since her passing, several thoughts come to mind. One at least sounds so egotistical that I never could accept it while she was still alive. What Joyce wanted most in life was to be with me. When I finally came to see that, it changed my memories about her. There were a couple other thoughts as well. One, it was almost impossible to say no to her. All of our difficulties of our last year and a half were related to our not being together. It started in her head as it began to feed her lies. But all would have been right if I had just demanded we be allowed to live together. And it was my clumsy attempt to do that that got us thrown out of the bridge. But let's go into the positives. Growing up, I read a lot, particularly if it was about hunting, fishing, playing sports, or flying. I fell in love with it all. I wanted to do it all. That I was able to do as much as I did is a miracle in hindsight. In 1967, I was trying to make my dream of hunting mountain sheep a reality. Alaska was my pick because it is probably the cheapest place to make it happen. Checking outfitters, I discovered an ad by Bob Elliott of Fairbanks offering a do-it-yourself trip for a cost. I felt I could bring our two oldest sons along. That was David, 17, and Mike, 15. Dale, at 12 or 11, was too young. I figured we would fly to Fairbanks, hunt the opening August 20th, finish the 30th, and have the boys back to high school for the start of their new year. I told my plan to the family. After a bit, Joyce said she and Dale wanted to go along. Startled, I asked how that could work. She said we could drive our van, camp on the way. The older boys and I could go on our hunt. What about you? I asked. You and Dale. Oh, we can fly home, she said. Wow, that was a serious rewrite of my plan. But it was hard to say no to Joyce, if not impossible. So we bought a couple more sleeping bags and a pup tent, made modifications to the van to ward off the flying gravel, borrowed an umbrella tent from Uncle Everett, and stocked up on groceries. We took off about the 10th of August. From our Wisconsin home, it was 2,300 miles to Dawson Creek, British Columbia, the start of the Alaska Highway. Then we had 1,100 miles of gravel highway to the Alaska border, another 200 or 300 to Anchorage, which we decided we'd make as our first stop. Joyce getting us breakfast and keeping us fed, and she never seemed happier than on that trip. To arrive Fairbanks in time to meet our bush pilot, we soon were on our way where the state fair was underway. We saw our first hot air balloon there and experienced unexpected heat and daylight till 11 p.m. And after a day or two, we left Joyce and Dale at the Steele Hotel in the seedy district just down from Fairbanks' lovely Chamber of Commerce. Boy, I hope she knows what she's doing, was my thought, as I, Dave, and Mike headed for our own adventure. We ended up 40 miles from the nearest road on a little delta river with a poor guide. Elliot had set up a nice tent hidden in the scraggly spruces along the river. He had found a little gravel bar where he was able to land his super cub. Our hunt was partially successful in spite of not getting any sheep. On August 30th, we awaited the arrival of Elliot and his cub to whisk us back to civilization. Since we had no communication whatsoever, we didn't know that Fairbanks had suffered flooding, making the airport unusable. The flooding had also wiped out some of the landing area by our camp. So we sat. We couldn't leave camp because when the plane showed up, we would have to be ready to leave. Walking the 40 miles out did not seem feasible, so we waited. "Pass me the Wheaties box," someone said. "I haven't read that one yet." Finally, on September 2nd, we heard a plane. It was Elliot come to get us. School had already started, but at least we were on our way home. When I got to a payphone, I dialed our number collect. To my great relief, I heard Joyce's voice and realized she had made it home. "Where are you?" she demanded. 4 days later, we were home, 800 miles a day, camp every night. We learned that Joyce had persuaded the hotel keeper to take she and Dale to the airport, where they caught a flight to Seattle. Then she visited an uncle. There she visited an uncle she had not seen in years, and finally caught the Northern Pacific Railroad to Minneapolis, then a Greyhound bus to Milwaukee, where she called my sisters and got the final ride home. In 1967, I learned to fly. Joyce hated to fly. But let's look at some of these shots and see what she did to be with me. In my second airplane, a Cessna 182, she flew with me to visit her maid of honor and her husband, and we took them flying with us. She flew with friends to the Fish Boil on Washington Island off the end of Door County, Wisconsin. Then I signed up for a mountain flying course sponsored by the AOPA. With friends, we flew to Colorado Springs from our home in Wisconsin. And on the final day of that course, a local flight instructor joined us for a hands-on day flying the high country of western Colorado. Another trip, we flew to, a couple times we flew to Florida, and once across 60 miles of ocean to the Bahamas. We had a wonderful family time there. Lots of fun in a rented place. In a rented plane, we flew to a family reunion in Pennsylvania. We flew in my twin Apache at night over Lake Michigan to return a niece to her home. And finally, after my planes were finally sold, we flew in a Beaver float plane to a remote Ontario lake with our son Mike and his wife Shelley. And there were commercial flights to Jordan, Israel, Europe. Joyce, who hated to fly, did all of this so she could be with me. My idol, Jack O'Connor, had written that you need to get your sheep hunting done before your mid-50s. Hunting these mountain critters is strenuous. Do it while you are able. In 1980, I was 51, but that year we availed ourselves of the opportunity to visit Israel with our St. Andrew Lutheran group, and Joyce happily agreed, as well as my parents. The first stop was Jordan, where our principal attraction was Petra, the ancient city carved into the rock walls of a steep canyon. Joyce not only flew, but rode an Arabian horse from the bus down into the city. From Jordan, we continued our tour in Israel. It was a great trip where Joyce, like many others, was overwhelmed by the thought of walking where Jesus walked. We swam in the Sea of Galilee, and Joyce dried her swimsuit while walking afterwards. She also enjoyed the buoyant waters of the Dead Sea, as well as all the other amazing places of the Holy Land. In 1981, I was no longer going to delay my sheep hunt. The outfitter I picked was based near Burwash Landing in the Yukon Territory. Burwash has a few dwellings and a decent airport. It is on the Alaska Highway, almost 200 miles from Whitehorse, the capital and largest city in the Yukon. I would fly to Whitehorse, where I would be met by our outfitter John Ostashik, flown to his base near Burwash. My hunt was scheduled from August 28th for 2 weeks. I kept Joyce aware of my plans. In July, she announced she wanted to go along. On a sheep hunt? I inquired. No, not on the hunt, but we could take the pickup camper, she replied. What would you do while I was hunting? Well, I'll stay in the camper in Whitehorse while you're in the mountains. I know you have been in Whitehorse before, but do you remember that it can snow any time of the year and it gets 60 to 70 below in the winter? Yep, I know, but it won't. Always the optimist, and you can't say no to Joyce. I put the camper on the pickup, and we packed for the trip. The camper we had then had no bathroom. Water was in a big tank, subject to freezing if the weather turned cold. But she and I had made other trips in it in cold weather. It did have a furnace of sorts, and we had it insulated as best we could, but it was not entirely comfortable in real cold, and bathroom facilities were always a problem then. We left our house around the 20th of August. The Alaska Highway had been greatly improved since we first traveled it 14 years before, although about 100 miles are always under repair during the summers. We had great times along the way, particularly enjoying British Columbia. Those Canucks enjoy their flowers. When we got to Whitehorse, we set up camp in a nice campground. This will be a nice place for Joyce while I'm in the hills. On the 28th of August, I gathered my gear, met our host, flew 200 miles to Burwash to begin our great adventure, or my great adventure. The next day, I was deep in sheep country and out of touch with civilization. What we had failed to note was that our lovely campground closed for the winter September 1st. I never learned of it until the end of the hunt, but Joyce learned it when they told her she had to leave. Now what? Joyce's solution? Contact the police. Their suggestion was that she park in their parking lot, and she could use their bathroom. Perfect solution. But she still had to have a way to pass the time. And before long, she found a delicatessen that served good sandwiches. And about the second day, they asked her if she was looking for work. Another perfect solution. The owners were a German immigrant couple who had been in the country for a number of years. and had developed a good business making lunches for the working men. The owners were very good to Joyce, and one weekend they invited her to spend time with them at their cabin on Lake LaBarge. The other weekend they drove down to Skagway, and Joyce and the woman rode the famed narrow-gauge railroad track back to Whitehorse. It all worked out nicely, in spite of being illegal for an alien to be employed in Canada. Plus, Joyce was living nicely next door to the police. Finally, one more story about Joyce's persuasive abilities. To make a long story short, I was involved in a conservation issue involving Yellowstone National Park. I was involved enough to earn an invitation to an affair in the park where President Bill Clinton was to make an official announcement that we had won our battle. Several weeks before the event, I got a phone call from Secret Service, and I spent half an hour being vetted. Were you ever convicted of a felony, etc.? Do you own property in a foreign country? And on and on. Finally, I was told to be at a certain meadow outside of Cook City, Montana, on such and such a day at 7:30 a.m. Well, Cook City is almost 100 miles from Cody, where we lived then, so I decided to put the camper on the pickup, spend the night in that meadow. And when Joyce heard the plan, she said she wanted to go along. "What will you do there?" I asked. "You haven't been approved by Secret Service." "I'll find something," she said. And remember, you couldn't say no to her. Next morning there were 3 or 4 school buses in our meadow, and we were told which one to board, and I headed for my assigned bus with Joyce beside me. Secret Service checked me on their list, told me to get on board. Joyce right behind me. I found a seat, noted Joyce in conversation with the agent. Presently, she sat down beside me. "What?" I asked. "Did you tell him?" "Oh, I don't know. But he finally said, 'We don't usually do this, but go ahead and get on board.'" We were driven into Yellowstone Park, and outside of the meadow under Baronet Peak, we got out and walked into the meadow. There were probably 50 or 60 folks there, including John Denver and other big-time conservationists. Shortly, 3 helicopters landed, one carrying all 3 of the Clintons. And Joyce managed to get right up and personal with the press, as well as having a little chat with Hillary. Imagine an unvetted woman cozying up to the President of the United States, chatting up his wife, and asking John Denver to sing to her. So I think I will end our stories here of the remarkable woman who shared and brightened my life for almost 70 years. She was a wonderful homemaker and mother to our sons. I think we will all miss her. Thank you for listening and watching. Goodbye, dear, until we meet again. And in the words of the song sung at our wedding, I'll be loving you always with a love that's true, always, when the things you plan need a helping